The first time we meet MT is in Infinity Train's 7th episode, The Chrome Car, with her presence only being known through her refusal to smile back at our protagonist. Less than 2 minutes after this initial reveal, she attempts to leave Tulip permanently trapped in her former prison, something she never comes especially close to regretting. And yet, skip forward 10 episodes, less than an hour and a half of screen time, and she's become one of the most inherently interesting characters of not only her show, but of her medium as well. A protagonist both undeniably somewhat unlikable, yet even more so sympathetic. Getting back to the Chrome Car, the character spends her first quarter hour somewhat by necessity being written as if she would never return. What this ultimately entails is a lack of any real journey being established, with more of a focus being on what the character is and how she feels about it. MT, or Mirror Tulip, as we'll eventually learn the temporary alias stands for, is exactly that. The version of Tulip whose sole responsibility it is to reflect her prime version in any applicable surface. From the jump, the show does not shy away from portraying just how truly horrifying this concept is. The idea that an equally conscious version of oneself is constantly being forced to helplessly watch their quote-unquote realer doppelganger. A being forced to live a life, as MT puts it, of nothing. It's hell, a situation so undesirable that MT pretty quickly accepts death as an alternative when her plan to swap with Tulip fails to lead to her escape. In this first standalone episode though, MT does get her happy ending, a seemingly conditionless escape from the mirror reality and a life separate from the prime version she was once chained to. In comparison to the underlying dark tones of the episode, there's a pretty stark contrast in the happily ever after of MT's final moments, the type of easily earned freedom that Infinity Train just isn't willing to grant its cast, a situation that the show wastes little time remedying. Given the series' anthology format, something strikingly uncommon among its animated peers, the second season of Infinity Train had the responsibility of establishing how much they're willing to deviate from the format of their pilot outing. Book 1, while obviously quite interesting in its own right, ultimately followed a pretty standard 13-year-old girl from her time before the train to her time after the train, with Tulip fitting several of the stereotypes of the genre. That's to say nothing about how much I love Tulip's time as the protagonist, but swap her out with a Dipper or a Steven or a Luce, and the season just isn't going to feel wildly different. All of that to say, the immediate tone of MT's entrance into her own season is nothing short of terrifically jarring. It's almost villainous the way she re-enters the show, a feeling that does quickly subside as we learn more about what she's been up to, but I wouldn't exactly say it ever goes away. Speaking of which, our entry point back into the world of MT comes as the character is undergoing a massive visual change. Something initially portrayed as an attempt to aid her evasion from those who wish to end her freedom, but something that retroactively reads more like the eradication of whatever stereotypically feminine traits she has inherited from her prime. That second point is something we'll circle back to in a little less than however long this video ends up being, but for the sake of this episode, MT's most clear ambition is to make good on the promise she made to Tulip, to make her own way. And yet, everywhere MT goes, she sees reminders of this person she used to be, of who she was when her sole purpose was to reflect. And nothing is screaming this louder than those chasing her, Mace and Sieve, fellow former reflections who have made it their sole purpose to punish MT for daring to seek a better life. For the bulk of the book, these two mostly just serve as this season's ticking clock, with their ability to jump out of any reflection adding tension to each and every scene. But their greater thematic purpose to MT's journey will eventually become more than apparent. As I mentioned before, perhaps the cruelest symptom of MT's former predicament was her inability to form any bonds with the outside world. Sure, she has been able to watch her prime version have, and usually gunk up, relationships, but MT enters this season only knowing 3 people, one of which being her prime self a reality away, and the other 2 being those who wish to kill her. However, as book 2 progresses, and as this video will entail, this changes for who has now become our newest protagonist. Whereas MT's life was once one of solitude, it will quickly become one at least partially defined by her relationships with those around her, starting with perhaps the most important of them all. Okay, Alan Dracula may not actually be the most important piece of MT's journey, but it'd be hard to define his role as anything other than essential. For the unaware, Alan Dracula, or AD, as the show will eventually give in to mostly calling him, is a deer with the ability to pretty much do anything but talk or be helpful on any sort of consistent basis. After MT meets him and he perhaps inadvertently saves her, and all the way up to the final minute or so of the series, the character pretty much does nothing to help the rest of the gang achieve their goals. But he's still kind of the exact companion that MT needed. He doesn't talk, which is obviously appealing to our protagonist who spent her entire life only being able to listen. He doesn't judge, which is helpful when you're a criminal. And most of all, he's just a nice reminder to MT that not every single being on the train is out to get her. In addition to this, Alan Dracula also ends up being a massive contributor to the actual most important relationship that MT will have, as he's the reason she meets Jesse in the black market car, the reason she stays with Jesse in the family tree car, the proxy for her feelings towards Jesse in the map car, and the reason that she and Jesse reconcile in the Toad car. So while the initial transition to this section of the video was mostly a joke, it's hard to argue that MT wouldn't still be on the train, or worse, without AD. The fifth outing of the season, the Parasite car, ends up being the one that focuses most on Alan Dracula, ironically by somewhat taking him out of the episode. It's a quarter hour that's both one of the most fun of the series, as Infinity Train's version of Drag Race is fun as hell, while also being one of the most puzzling, as it does end with perhaps the most inexplicable number change in the series. But somewhere within all of that is a little story about MT and Jesse learning to fully accept their friend despite his imperfections. Something that AD has clearly already done. Towards the end of the book, as the title characters of the next 4 sections of this video somewhat take over the season, AD becomes less and less involved in the narrative, but they do sneak in a final sentimental moment between MT and her first ever friend. As we'll discuss in like 3 minutes, MT changes what her ultimate goal is about halfway through the season, but up until that point, she's pretty much trying to become Alan Dracula, drifting through the train without being bothered. And I really love how the final longish interaction between the pair addresses this point. Even if MT has evolved to wish for a life outside the train, she still respects AD's desires to stay in the place he calls home, emphasizing that he was never her pet and always her friend. While Alan Dracula is ultimately primarily the comedic relief for the season, a role he fills more than excellently, it's moments like this that show just how critical he is to the essence of the book. Even if you could hypothetically create a version of these 10 episodes that didn't feature Alan Dracula in a way you just couldn't do without Jesse or MT, it sure as hell wouldn't be nearly as good. Speaking of Jesse,
maybe this was fate. Fated to be a tree boy. Ow! Why did you...
In almost every other season of television, Jesse would be the protagonist. He's the one engaging with the mechanics of the train, he's the one with the most obvious arc, just everything about the character screams that he should be the main focus. And it's that jumping off point that makes his relationship with MT something wholly unique. From the jump, this dynamic is a means for immediate tension between the two. Even if everything Jesse does is pretty innocuous, MT can't help but put the weight of her trauma onto Jesse, yet another passenger she seems destined to just watch. She snaps when he asks for a name, feels more than comfortable lying to him, and just generally treats him like he's already done to her what many others have. This is, of course, not to say that she consistently hates him for any extended period of time, as the pair do share some quite nice moments towards the end of both their second and third episodes together, but it's pretty fair to say that they aren't exactly best buds until they get through their fourth. The Toad's car, besides just being quite easily the funniest title location of the show, is also the episode that really features the last piece of tension between the season's leads, but it's some pretty rough tension. For starters, it's here where MT really has to deal with the consequences of the shit she's put Jesse unknowingly throughout the book. The secrets that could have easily gotten him killed far before he ever got his exit. We'll get to the Chrome cops a little bit later, but this effect is only added to by Sieve's good cop routine here, as when he tells Jesse that MT would sell anybody out to save herself, it forces both him and the audience to reckon with the fact that it's probably true. At the same time though, this episode also features the most damning thing against Jesse, as we watch him gleefully allow his friends to bully his brother into breaking his arm before telling him that he failed the man test. I think the decision to include the scene relatively late into the season works really damn well too, as we've been given 30 straight minutes of reasons to like this guy, only to watch him do this horrific thing to the person he was supposed to protect. Anyway, ultimately the key MT moment of this one comes through an action of Jesse, as he ultimately seems not only willing to put all of this stuff behind him, but also willing to fully accept MT for who she is. Something that nobody else in the character's life has ever been able to do. You can almost watch MT realize this in the episode, this evidence to the contrary that everybody's out to get her, that slowly starts to plant the seed that a solitary life might not be for her after all. This idea that Jessie is her connection to a part of society that might actually treat her as a person is something that continues pretty heavily throughout the remainder of their on-screen time together, and especially in the Lucky Cat car. After MT is forced to confront the explicit non-passenger discrimination of the car, with the literal games being literally rigged against her, the character breaks, finally fully realizing that a peaceful life on the train just isn't in the cards. It's not much in comparison to the devastation that the character is faced with in the next 4 episodes, but it is a sudden low for a pretty stoic protagonist. A low that's, as usual, aided with the presence of Jessie. And it's not just that Jessie tells MT in this moment that he wants her to exit alongside him, but it's the idea that he just thought this was obvious. Jessie never saw MT in the way that he sees Alan Dracula or that Tulip saw Atticus. He sees her as if she was a human passenger on a train where she didn't belong. It's just such a sweet moment as MT's faith in humanity reaches an all-time high, right before it's about to be rocked like it's never been rocked before.
Whoa! Slow down there. You don't want to end up like Lucy. Aim first, okay?
If you've heard me talk about this show in pretty much any context outside of this video, then you know just how much I adore the Apex. I think the aesthetics of the group are sick as hell, Grace and Simon are both these fascinating characters to follow, and they largely fuel what is not only my favorite season of this show, but one of my favorite seasons of any show. And yet, I still think the impact that they have on MT's journey in this season is somewhat underappreciated. Perhaps the most important aspect of this impact actually comes in something that's a little easy to miss, being how in their attempt to make MT feel like nothing, they instead chose to make it seem as if they don't care at all what MT feels, as if the thoughts and emotions of the character truly have no value of any sort. Grace especially is excellent at this, always looking at and talking to Jessie, driving every conversation away from his companions and back onto him. Unfortunately for Grace and Simon, MT refuses to be unacknowledged, pushing and pushing even when Jesse's gone on his field trip with Grace, leaving only Simon to deliver a little prelude for what is to come. In an instant, all of the dorkiness of Simon and dissonance of MT seem to fade away, for a conversation between a man with a number and a reflection who desperately wants one. It's pretty fucking chilling. If Jessie serves as the antithesis of who MT believes humanity to be, then it's not hard to see the Apex as more than the opposite. A group of people who, in an attempt to build some type of camaraderie between them, have decided to frame the world as a struggle between themselves and those they see as inferior. Sure, throughout the book, MT has come face to face with several people who have treated her like dirt, from Marcel's refusal to let her touch the map to the Lucky Cat car being literally rigged against her, but it's never felt as brazen and as unapologetic as this. Later episodes of this show will work towards revealing why the Apex hates denizens, or gnolls as they call them, but as far as MT knows, they hate her for the same reason she hates herself. Ultimately, although not in the way that Simon describes, the Apex do truly help Jesse in a way that MT couldn't, providing him with a chance to stand up for his friend in the way he couldn't for his brother. It's this really sweet moment for the characters, as MT is seemingly rescued by the one person who sees her as, well, a person. Well, at least it's a sweet moment if you forget how many episodes are in the season. Anyway, for as much as I would love to talk more about the Apex, this video is about MT, and there is one more group that manages to see the protagonist as even less than nothing.
A lonely to slave a girl on exit day in the morning.
Mace and Sieve, the mirror police introduced alongside MT back in book 1, are pretty much the perfect antagonists. And I don't mean that in the sense that they are these deep and interesting characters in themselves, as they're about as static can be, but it's hard to imagine a pair of villains that could push their protagonist any further. Throughout their first 8 episodes, this largely reveals itself through them literally pushing MT from train car to train car, with the whole jumping out of reflections thing being this kind of hilariously great ticking clock. Sure, they'll throw a few slurs like sliver or defect her way, but they mostly just remain the stereotypical good and bad cops to MT's acts of rebellion. However, in episode 2-8, The Wasteland, that changes. After both Jesse accidentally leaves the one he swore to protect behind, as well as another kick-ass chase in a season full of them, MT, Alan Dracula, and Mace's upper half get separated from not only Sieve and Mace's bottom half, but also from the train that our protagonist has learned to call home. The reason behind the decision to place this quarter hour outside of the train rather than just in a desert car or whatever is something that becomes pretty obvious with only a few grand shots of the situation. Not only is MT away from the chaotic familiarity of the train, so is the audience. Before this interaction that follows, there has been pretty little back and forth between MT and the men following her, pretty clearly due to the whole chasing thing, a fact that makes the psychological torture of the next 8 minutes hit even harder. While Mace being shackled to MT while spewing all of her self-doubts isn't exactly the most subtle of the show's metaphors, that doesn't really change the fact that this scene is really damn effective at emphasizing the mental turmoil that our protagonist continues to acquire. Throughout the remainder of the episode, Mace switches between 2 different lines of attack towards MT's newly found struggle with identity, starting by first simply mocking the absurdity of the situation. This idea that a chrome girl from a mirror world has been traveling with a superpowered deer in an attempt to live out the rest of her life in a world filled with quote-unquote normal people. This is something the series somewhat grapples with towards the end of the season, the idea that it's just pretty difficult to imagine a conceivable reality where MT and Jesse are able to live a life together of relative normalcy. In response to this, MT, for the first time of the season, becomes shockingly quiet. While the character found it somewhat easy to fight against those who wanted to prevent her from reaching her goal, the idea that said goal may have been inherently flawed from the jump is something she just can't grapple with. The other half of Mace's attacks are even a bit more interesting though, as he brings into question the nature of MT's existence in the first place. It's delivered in such a way where the show is clear that it isn't trying to establish anything canonically, but Mace essentially posits whether or not MT was created solely to help her prime escape, whether or not her only purpose was the facilitation of the train's wishes. This is continued through his analysis of her relationship with Jesse, implying that while she may have ceased being one person's reflection, she ended up just following somebody else around anyway. And while Mace's previous comments may have stunned MT, this possibility just completely wrecks her. The idea that not only may her entire existence have been programmed from the jump, but that she'll truly never be able to prove it one way or the other. And as the audience, we won't really know either. That's really one of the things I love most about this season. Even though this book provides perhaps the most answers about the inner workings of the train that we ever get, these 2 ideas from Mace are never fully answered. Maybe MT was created solely for Tulip, and maybe she will never live a normal life with Jesse, but maybe none of that really matters. At least for now, maybe all that MT should care about is what she knows to be true.
I know who I am, and Jesse didn't want to leave me. We're friends, and that's real. And I'll get off the train and find him.
Both Mace and Sieve will live for a bit longer before their almost shockingly gruesome respective demises, but their purpose is fulfilled by pushing MT to this point. After being forced to listen all about the unknowns of the past and future, everything that could go wrong or possibly has always been wrong, MT decides to just move forward, no matter what else gets in her way.
For reality-bending buttons you've got to press, you're gonna do it!
But why would I? You're exactly where you're supposed to be.
Throughout this video, I've defined MT through her relationships with those around her, but now, with nobody left but a few more minutes of Alan Dracula, It's time for our protagonist to define herself. Starting at the end of the wasteland, MT decides that her ultimate goal has become getting a number, both the means to an exit, as well as the train's representation of one's ability to grow and change. In just a few scenes, MT has already begun to become more of a typical main character, a protagonist with a likable goal that aligns her against who we already believe to be the opposition, but I think Infinity Train has one more trick up its sleeve. Episode 2-9, the tape car, has two primary goals. First, through this honestly brilliant Alien meets Jurassic Park exploration of its titular location, we get what is probably the show's most honest attempt at explaining how any of this works. Infinity Train ultimately didn't last long enough for them to fully explain the deeper mechanics behind the show's mythos, but this episode explains much of the physical inner workings of the tape and number systems. There's a bunch of quite interesting and visceral stuff here, with tapes shooting out of the scalp almost certainly making me a bit nauseous as I edit them into this part of the video, but you know that's not what I want to talk about. Instead, the most fascinating decision this episode makes, one of the most fascinating in a show full of them, is continuing to present MT as kind of an asshole. Within the scope of these 11 minutes, MT first effectively kills an old man, tries to do the same to a child, claiming that she, quote, needs it more than her, and then, when all else fails, she decides to go on a violent rampage on the facility she knows allows others to find their exit, almost as if she's willing to doom everybody else to her fate for the sake of whatever little revenge she thinks she can find. It is nothing short of a villainous betrayal of a character we've seemingly seen grow throughout the last 8 episodes, a complete and utter disregard for everybody else around her. And yet, at the end of all of this, when she screams into an unhearing robot that she too is a person begging to be seen as who she believes she is, you, of course, feel for her. Assuming you've either glanced at the discourse surrounding this season, or honestly just watched the 10 episodes with both eyes open, the twist at the end of this video isn't going to be much of a surprise to you. Even if certain aspects of the thematic core of this book have been somewhat maliciously blunted by a network with more financial concerns than creative ones, watching this collection of episodes without perceiving the trans allegory at the core of it is almost impossible. I mean, the book begins with a character removing any trace of their femininity, features said character constantly referred to by what they used to be, even with slurs such as Null and Sliver, and then, as we'll get to in a bit, ends with them choosing a new name that better reflects the person they've become after this journey. And it's not just the beginning and the ending either, with the ongoing thread of the season being government harassment that ultimately turns to attempting to make their victims' wishes seem silly or unreasonable. All throughout the season, MT has had to make judgment calls on whether or not each person she meets either respects her desire to live out this life she feels she needs to, or hates her for even daring to want for better. It's this context, this exhaustion from living in a world that seems designed for her to struggle, that explains this behavior throughout the penultimate episode, as well as what the character will have to go through next. Most of the Book 2 finale, The Number Car, feels a bit more story-focused rather than thematic. Jesse ultimately becomes seemingly the only passenger to ever enter the train with a physical problem, MT's saving grace ends up being a technicality. It's just an episode that somewhat necessarily has to spend a good chunk of its 11 minutes physically getting our characters to the end of the season. But there are a few moments here that do make this feel like the fitting end to MT's journey. First, while 1-1 is still a bit too goofy to have his half of the conversation feel especially interesting, this MT line is about as tonally fitting as it gets.
I'm not a sliver, I'm not a null, I'm not any of the hundreds of names that everyone wants to give me. I'm my own person who is getting off this train.
Additionally, even though MT is not a traditional passenger, the fact that the show still got a ridiculously hard-hitting tape scene out of her anyway is some obscenely good writing. Having her watch her old self with such shame for the hatred she used to have allows her to see proof that the train was wrong, that a denizen like her can change. But none of these are what I would really describe as the Book 2 scene. As while MT's execution of Mace is gorily excellent, and the Toad's car is still so deeply hilarious, there's nothing about MT's journey that feels as defining as its final minutes. And the reason this section of the video wasn't titled MT. If you go back and time it, there's only about 75 seconds between AD blasting out of the episode after committing murder and the credits beginning to roll. But damn, does the density of this scene make it feel quite a bit longer. As MT lays on the ground, there's a beat where the show often lets an episode sit before doing something else awful to the characters. You've even already seen it in this episode, the type of fake out that Infinity Train just adores. But it never comes. MT is finally free. However, this can't be the end of her time in the show, as MT's entire goal has been trying to figure out who she is in a post-Tulip world, a question she damn well isn't going to exit the series without answering, and it couldn't be more fitting where the character finds the answer. Gazing into the beautiful water of her new home and seeing her own reflection for the first time without being terrified of what is to come, her name becomes fittingly quite clear. Anyway, that's about it for me. Thank you so much to everybody who waited ridiculously long for me to cover this set of episodes. I know this format wasn't entirely what I promised, but part of the reason I scrapped the previous version of this video was because I felt I didn't really cover Lake in the way I wanted to, so I hope this somewhat remedied it. If you want to see approximately 3 to 6 posts a week, you can find me over on Blue Sky, but either way, this has been Ample Samuel, and I'll hopefully see you in less than a month this time. Thanks for watching.